this book is giving us a variety of angles all at once. That's very interesting to have the things going on with Bobby Baker in Washington, press reports of what's happening, things going on with Ruth Paine, things going on with Jack Ruby. This is a quite global look at the details of this moment. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then I'd like to welcome you. I'm Jess, Connell, and I would love to earn your subscription today. We are in part 15 of a walk through the president's assassination. We're looking back at that fateful day of November 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy visited Dallas. He had visited multiple cities in Texas, and this was his fourth city to visit. So today we're going to be getting into that day. We have gone through a lot of front matter to understand the timing and the lead up to the assassination through the other books that we've read. Now we are on part 15. The book we are looking at is Act of Treason by Mark North. The subtitle is The Role of J. Edgar Hoover in the Assassination of President Kennedy. Now, I have not read this book. If you're new to the channel, then you don't know this, but a generous donor mailed me 3 boxes of his research books. So thank you very much for that. You have blessed us all, but I am trying to familiarize myself with the breadth of literature that I now own, and so this is my goal to do it, to just walk through the assassination and look at different books. I have not read this book. When I looked at the reviews of this book, I'll say it was a mixed bag as to whether or not readers felt that Mark North had made a sufficient case that Edgar Hoover had a role. Now, I'm to the point where I can say, yes, based on what I know, he certainly had access to information that exceeds anything that any of us would have seen. As the FBI director at the time, he certainly had access to that information. Whether or not he was in the planning or allowing of the assassination is an entirely different question for me. And maybe we'll get into some of that here. But the thing that we're going to get today is the actual assassination from this book. So I'm just trying to give you a little overview that readers did feel that this book, some felt that he had succeeded, and some felt that he showed that, of course, Hoover had nefarious dealings going on, but that, that it failed to meet the requirement of what it set out to do, which was saying that he had a role in the assassination. So if you're looking at books and you're wanting to understand Hoover, this seems like it would be a great book to do. But now we're going to read through the events of the assassination. I don't know if you feel it, but we know that this is going to be a heavy reading. But here we are. We are in Mark North's book, Act of Treason. We're going to actually start the day before because it gives some critical information that we want to have in our minds as we head into the day. So it says 11/21/63, Thursday. Dallas Press states, a Weather Bureau forecaster said Wednesday that rain will likely appear Friday when President Kennedy will fly into Dallas. The Afternoon Times Herald front pages the map of the motorcade route. According to Agent Hosty, there were some scurrilous pamphlets, actually leaflets, circulated around Dallas on the 21st. It was a poster of President Kennedy with a front and profile view saying, "Wanted for treason." I took those pamphlets over to the Secret Service office the morning of the 21st. These are circulated by Walker's people. This would be General Walker, the one that had been shot at, that they're saying, see, we have Walker and Kennedy in opposition to one another, and we're being expected to believe that Oswald was trying to fire at them both. I mean, I guess you could make the case that a kook would fire at any, potential celebrity type person. But the two were opposed to one another. Walker did not like Kennedy, and he's responsible for the group handing out these leaflets. Oswald goes to work as usual. During the 10 a.m. break, he approaches Frazier. I was standing there getting the orders in, and he said, "Could I ride home with you this afternoon?" And I said, "Sure. Anytime you want to go see your wife, that's all right with me." And he said, "I'm going home to get some curtain rods. Put in an apartment." I said, very well. I never thought more about it. In reality, Oswald is probably more anxious to resolve his argument with Marina. By Thursday afternoon, Ruby was in Houston, monitoring President Kennedy's movements in preparation for the next day's assassination in Dallas. I'm going to go ahead and look up the end note for that one. He's asserting that Jack Ruby was in Houston the day before, which I had not heard before. Have you guys heard that before? Okay, this is taken from a book by Scheim, Contract on America. So if you have that book, you can drop down in the comments what that says, but that's interesting to me that Ruby was in Houston. Press reports say this, which gives us an insight as to what was happening, just like we've talked about in other episodes with the investigation into LBJ and Bobby Baker. Press reports this: Mrs. Gertrude Novak, a former business associate of Robert G. Baker, opened up several avenues of information for Senate investigators today. She was questioned for nearly 3 hours at a closed session of the Senate Rules Committee. Mrs. Novak was not questioned about either the alleged sex angles in the Baker case or reports that her husband's death last year was a... In another development today, Senator Moss said he suspected Baker of responsibility for denying him choice committee assignments last January. His assertions closely parallel the view of 2 other senators who said last week that Mr. Baker had managed to block their assignments to committees of their choice. Press. Robert F. Kennedy said today he planned to remain in his Attorney General post. Dolan was seen by an FBI agent entering a bookmaking establishment in Dallas. He was said to be connected to Eugene Hale Brading. Okay, so already what I'm seeing from the reading, and I'm sure you're hearing it, is that it is a very punchy piece-by-piece telling of the assassination. But I just want you to know all of these things are in quotes. So he is essentially putting together the facts for us in order through press reports and through written statements by other people. Very little of this is his own telling, which is an interesting way of going through the assassination. So let's see, because he has citations for every single sentence here. It's pretty daunting. There are over 800 citations for this one chapter, just to give you an insight into the level of citing that he's doing. Press report talks about President Kennedy in Houston, in San Antonio. JFK is reportedly relaxed. In the late afternoon, Ruth Paine drives home from her grocery shopping and sees Oswald on the front lawn. I was surprised to see him. He was playing with June and talking with Marina. As I entered the house and Lee had just come in, I said to him, "Our president is coming into town." And he said, "Ah, yes," and walked on into the kitchen, which was a common reply from him on anything. Nothing more was said about it. He went to bed very early. She stayed up and talked with me some, but there was no coolness that I noticed. He was quite friendly on the lawn. They seemed warm, like a couple making up a small spat. From Marina, we get this. He said that he was lonely because he hadn't come in the preceding weekend, and he was anxious to make his peace with me. He was not angry. He was upset. He tried very hard to please me. He spent a bit of time putting away diapers and played with the children on the street. He suggested that we rent an apartment in Dallas. He said he was tired of living alone, but I refused. I said it would be better if I remained with Ruth until the Christmas holidays. While he was living alone and I stayed on with Ruth, we were spending less money. And I told him to buy me a washing machine. He said he would buy me a washing machine. He said since he was home on Thursday that it wouldn't make sense to come again on Friday, that he would come for the weekend. He then stopped talking and sat down and watched television. As usual, he leaves money for her and the children. Ruth, quote, realized he had gone to bed. I went out to the garage to paint some children's blocks, and I noticed when I entered the garage that the light was on. I felt Lee had gone out to the garage, perhaps worked out there or gotten something. Most of their clothing was out there, all their winter things. They were getting things out from time to time, warmer things for the cold weather, so it was not at all remarkable that he went to the garage, but I thought it careless of him to have left the light on. At about 10 p.m., Ruby stopped in for about 45 minutes at the Egyptian Lounge, a Dallas underworld hangout. One of its owners was Joseph Campisi. On December 7th, 1963, Campisi told the FBI of his contact with Ruby that Thursday night when Ruby came to the Egyptian lounge for a steak. About midnight, Ruby stopped in at the restaurant in the Teamster-financed Dallas Cabana Hotel. With him was Larry Myers, who had checked into the Cabana that day. He was accompanied by Jean West. Myers later said he had picked her up at the 20 East Delaware Lounge in Chicago, which was a hotel with a reputation for party girls. In the late 1970s, the House Select Committee on Assassinations will state, "We were unable to locate West." So, that's an interesting little aside that I don't fully understand. Ruby comes in, Campisi sees him, they have a steak, or he sees him getting a steak, I guess. With Ruby was a man named Larry Myers who had checked in and had brought a new girl for the Cabana, it sounds like. But later, the HSCA was unable to even find this girl. Perhaps the meaning and significance of this is elucidated later in this book. I do feel this book is giving us a variety of angles all at once. That's very interesting to have the things going on with Bobby Baker in Washington, press reports of what's happening, things going on with Ruth Paine, things going on with Jack Ruby. This is a quite global look at the details of this moment. 11/22/63, Friday. Mrs. Mary Lawrence was working as head waitress at the Lucas B&B restaurant in Dallas during the early morning of November 22nd. At about 1:30 a.m., she told the FBI, a young man came into the restaurant and sat down at a table. When approached, the man stated he was waiting for Mr. Ruby. Mrs. Lawrence knew Jack Ruby, a regular patron, but had never seen that man before. About an hour later, Jack Ruby came into the restaurant and, after looking at the young man at the table, sat down at a table behind the cash register. He did not order his usual food, stating he didn't feel good, and ordered a large glass of orange juice. A few minutes later, the young man went over to Ruby's table. Thereafter, Ruby paid the bill for both himself and the young man who had eaten. They leave together. As late as 2:30 a.m., according to one of Ruby's employees, Ruby telephones his club from the Cabana. On the morning of the assassination, as Marina will testify, I woke up before Lee. At 7:10 a.m., Oswald was still asleep 10 minutes after his alarm went off. He was roused by Marina and rushed off to meet his ride. Yes, as we had pointed out in one of our recent reads, this doesn't look like a man who's planning everything down to the wire and going in with a total plan that he's got his rifle, he's ready to go, he's down for the day. This is a man who almost oversleeps, who almost misses his appointment with destiny. He's got a ride to the Texas School Book Depository and he almost misses it. He has to rush. Mrs. Randall, Wesley Frazier's sister, sees Oswald crossing the street carrying a package in a sort of heavy brown bag. She watches him go to Frazier's car and, quote, he opened the right back door and I saw that he was laying the package down, so I closed the kitchen door. He come back and stood on the driveway. This is an East Texas way of talking. He come back and stood on the driveway. You can hear the accent embedded in the speech sometimes, and for me it's endearing. I know people who still talk like this, who use verbs and words in ways that modern English doesn't accommodate, but it's very Texas to do so. Frazier, I was sitting there eating breakfast and talking to the little nieces. It was later than I thought it was. After getting into the car, Frazier notices the package. I said, "What's the package, Lee?" And he says, "Curtain rods." Frazier describes the trip to Dallas. I asked him, did he have fun playing with them babies? And he chuckled and he said he did. Upon arrival at the depository, Oswald gets out, takes his package, and proceeds toward the building, evidently not wanting to get himself or his bag wet. It is raining this morning. Frazier, from what I seen walking behind, he had it under his arm, and you couldn't tell that he had a package from the back. He continues, it is right as you get out of the grocery store, just more or less out of a package. You've seen some of these brown paper sacks. You can obtain them from most any of the stores, some varieties, but it was a package, just roughly about 2 feet long. Note that Oswald's rifle, disassembled, is nearly 3 feet long. We talked about this as well, the brown paper bag scenario, and how you can't make a 3-foot rifle fit into a 2-foot bag. It just doesn't work. Disassembled, if you take the rifle apart, it's still, you got to have 3 feet. And in order to have, which my arms maybe aren't even, maybe that's 3 feet, but 3 feet doesn't fit between the cupping of the hand and the armpit as was described. Another fellow employee, Jack Doherty, observes Oswald entering the building. I saw him when he first came in the door. I didn't see anything in his hands. The testimony of these 2 men suggests that what Oswald is carrying into the building is easily concealed, something narrow and flexible he holds close to his body, such as rolled cardboard or cloth. Fraser later observes Oswald. I saw him back and forth, that morning, walking around, filling books and so forth, filling orders, had invoices, filling orders. Were you on the 6th floor any that morning? One time, just a few seconds. Were they doing some work there that day? Yes, sir, they were. On the day of the assassination, Miltier, who we talked about, remember Joseph Miltier, he is the man who was from Georgia, but later is observed ostensibly in the crowd right at Dealey Plaza. On the day of the assassination, Miltier telephoned Somerset saying he was in Dallas and that Kennedy was due there shortly. Miltier commented that Kennedy would never be seen in Miami again. He then joins the crowds gathering near the corner of Elm Street in Dealey Plaza. Okay, I looked up the reference. That whole selection about Miltier is taken from Jim Marrs' Crossfire, the plot that killed Kennedy. So perhaps he has a citation for that. But if you're interested, since this book has such great citations, I just want to share those things with you when I'm hitting a new piece of information so that you can do your own legwork if you wish to. Press reports on deep involvement of Hoffa with Baker Associates, Levinson et al. So here is the quote about Hoffa's connection with Bobby Baker. Mr. Hoffa is a trustee of the pension fund. The earliest of the pension fund loans showing in the records at Las Vegas County Courthouse is $1 million to build a hospital near the Strip. It gives information about other connections, talks about the Fremont Hotel and its building. It says he was frequently arrested in Detroit, where he was a bookmaker, and in Miami, where he lived in the years when he was gambling and ran openly in Dade County. It talks about the connection with Louis Levinson, a leading gambler in Newport and Covington, Kentucky. A development in Levinson's recent activities is the suggestion that he may be part owner with Baker of the ServU Corporation. Levinson has refused to discuss the question of his ownership of part of the company. Prior to this, at some point during Kennedy's administration, the FBI, without telling anyone, had bugged an office and recorded phone conversations with Hoffa, also monitoring several Hoffa conversations in Teamster radio cars in Detroit. And there was a recording between one of the people and Hoffa. So that's what's being given. So we're being given information about what's unfolding in Congress. Remember, what we've talked about is that on this morning, the Dallas papers had a little section up at the top that said that Nixon was already saying Johnson would be off the ticket for 1964. And in real time, Bobby Baker, who was LBJ's right-hand man in the Senate for over a decade, and they were still incredibly close. They had done business dealings together, and it was thought that basically Bobby Baker did the dirty work of entrapping and also bribing and controlling various people in Congress. And so it's saying shady business deals with Hoffa are being connected pretty closely with Bobby Baker. So that puts LBJ and Bobby Baker and Hoffa potentially 2 to 3 dots away from one another, and all wrapped up in shady business deals. So interesting that that's happening that morning. Around 9 a.m., President Kennedy in his hotel room jokes with his wife in response to the news of the JFK wanted leaflets, saying, "We're really in nut country now." Oswald co-worker James Jarman speaks with him twice this morning. Between 9:30 and 10 a.m., they talk on the first floor. Well, he was standing up in the window, and I went to the window also, and he asked me what were the people gathering around the corner for, and I told him that the president was supposed to pass that morning, and he asked me did I know which way he was coming, and I told him yes, he had probably come down Main and turn on Houston and then back again on Elm, and then he said, "Oh, I see," and that was all. So there's a conversation between Oswald and a coworker indicating what are all these people even standing around for? What's going on? Seeming to indicate that he didn't realize the president was going right in front. Hoover sends 2 memos to RFK regarding Martin Luther King and CPUSA. Secret Service Lawson says it was quite rainy early in the morning, and he receives a phone call from the assistant agent in charge in Fort Worth asking about weather conditions, and they discussed whether to use the bubble top. I was told the bubble top was to be on if it was raining, and it was to be off if it was not raining. The weather became quite sunny all of a sudden, so I told them to have it off. At about this time, I want to point out, we don't know the origin of that command, but I want to point out that it's not being indicated here by this quote of Secret Service Agent Lawson that this is all at the direction of the president. It might be, but we don't get that indication from that. At about this time, the 6th floor work crew of a half dozen young men knocks off for lunch. If you didn't know, they were refinishing the floors on the 6th floor of the school book depository. And so there's people working there, actively working. So we're not given a time, but it sort of gets us into the moments before noon. It says, at about this time, the 6th floor work crew of half a dozen young men knocks off for lunch. According to Williams, I believe this day we quit about maybe 5 or 10 minutes early because all of us were so anxious to see the president. We took both elevators down. We always had a little kids game we played racing down with the elevators. On the way down, I heard Oswald, and I'm not sure whether he was on the 5th or the 6th floor, and he said, "Close the gate on the elevator and send the elevator back up." Obviously, Oswald needs one in order to get down to the 1st floor himself. So they have a 6th floor elevator. 2 different ones. They race down. He says it's like a little kid's game. We're going down. And on the way down, I hear, "Send the elevator back up." For these particular elevators, they are huge freight elevators, and you have to close a gate. And so he said, close the gate and send the elevator back up. If the gate wasn't closed, the elevator wouldn't send, and you could be calling for it up above, but it wouldn't come down. And so Oswald needed them to do that so that he could get down himself. So we have Oswald around this time going downstairs. 11:50, coworker Givens, quote, observed Lee reading a newspaper in the domino room where the employees eat lunch. The domino room is on the 1st floor of the depository. So sometime slightly before this, Oswald goes down. Now coworker Givens sees him reading in the domino room on the 1st floor. We're going to try to keep track of Oswald's movements, you and I, during this video. Bill Shelley said he saw Oswald on the 1st floor as early as 10 or 15 minutes before noon. So we have 11:50, maybe even 11:45. Oswald is on the 1st floor by 2 people's observations and confirmed by that elevator exchange. At 12, an employee called Eddie Piper said he actually spoke to Oswald just at 12 o'clock down on the 1st floor. That's a 3rd witness. The Warren Commission had these statements but omitted them. Piper said Oswald told him, quote, "I'm going up to eat," i.e. the lunchroom is on the 2nd floor. So he was in the 1st floor reading the paper and then says he's going up to the 2nd floor. He does so buying his lunch from one of the machines. I want to point out that this is an interesting thing that he buys lunch from one of the machines when in a different account he says he used the brown paper bag to carry a cheese sandwich and an apple. So did he buy lunch? Did he bring lunch? That seems like an important question that we should kind of hold in our heads throughout this whole scenario. Between 12 and 12:15 p.m., another employee eats his lunch on the 6th floor of the depository. He sees no one, including Oswald. I believe this is the chicken lunch that has been attributed to Oswald. It was apparently eaten by one of the workers, I believe, at that window. And so he's there from 12 to 12:15 eating his lunch. He sees no one, including Oswald. But at a quarter past, so at 12:15, he goes from the 6th floor down to a lower floor to view the motorcade, which was due to pass by at 12:25 p.m. For those who had the motorcade route, that was the time that they were scheduled to be in front of the building, was at 12:25. 12:15 to 12:20 p.m., Carol Arnold was secretary to the vice president of the book depository. An FBI report, omitted altogether from the Warren report, says that Mrs. Arnold was standing in front of the depository waiting for the motorcade when she thought she saw a fleeting glimpse of Oswald standing in a hallway. She says, about a quarter of an hour before the assassination, so this would be around 12:15, 12:20 is the estimate, I went into the lunchroom on the 2nd floor for a moment. Oswald was sitting in one of the booth seats on the right-hand side of the room as you go in. He was alone as usual and appeared to be having lunch. I did not speak to him, but I recognized him clearly. It was about 12:15. It may have been slightly later. So we have the testimony of this one man saying he's going to go up to eat. He reportedly buys his lunch. He's sitting there on the right side of this cafeteria room in one of the booth seats. 12:15, across the street from the main entrance to the depository, Arnold Rowland said he saw two men in 6th floor windows, one of them holding a rifle across his chest. At 12:15, Rowland's wife confirmed that her husband drew her attention to the man, whom he assumed to be a Secret Service guard. There was, of course, no such guard, and no other employees were on the 6th floor at that time. The time detail can be fixed so exactly because Rowland recalled seeing the man with the rifle just as a police radio nearby squawked out the news that the approaching motorcade had reached Cedar Springs Road. The police log shows that the president passed that point between 12:15 and 12:16. Mrs. Arnold's given time for leaving her office is corroborated by contemporaneous statements made by her and office colleagues. She told the FBI she finally left the building after visiting the lunchroom as late as 12:25. If Mrs. Arnold saw Oswald in the lunchroom at 12:15 or after, who were the two men, one of them a gunman, whom Rowland reported in the 6th floor windows? So here we have our first conflicting piece of evidence that should leave any viewer with a big question of, if I'm going to believe that Oswald did this thing, what do I do with Arnold Rowland and his wife, who saw two men in the window, one of them with a rifle across his chest at 12:15? Because you have Carolyn Arnold, who knows Oswald. She works with him. Think about the people you work with. You recognize them. You can tell. She sees him. She sees him sitting there. And she says it's between 12:15 and 12:20 that she sees him sitting in one of the booth seats on one of the right-hand sides as you go in. He was alone as usual, appeared to be having lunch. I didn't speak to him, but I recognized him. And also, these two men are in the window. Two men already does away with Oswald and Oswald alone. But two men up here while Oswald is here eating his lunch completely undermines the Warren report, which must be why this wasn't even included in the Warren report. The FBI report was omitted altogether from the FBI report. Very interesting. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but just this far into the reading, I'm already really enjoying what was a little bit clunky to me in the beginning. The telling of the story through a variety of sources felt like, wait, we're here, then we're here, then we're here. But now that we're into it, I'm really enjoying the robust view of the assassination from this lens. I hope you are too. We'll continue. 12:25 p.m. had the motorcade been on time, it would have passed beneath the windows of the depository at 12:25 p.m. This fact was evident from the published program and would clearly have come into the calculations of any would-be assassin. A killer who had planned the assassination would hardly have been sitting around downstairs after 12:15, as the evidence about Oswald suggests, if he expected to open fire as early as 12:25. Gordon Arnold, no relation to Carolyn, a soldier, home on leave, positions himself with others on the grassy knoll area to the right side of the plaza. Armed with his movie camera, Arnold walked to the top of the grassy knoll just before the president arrived, looking for a good vantage point. He went behind the fence, trying to find a way to the railroad bridge which crossed the road in front of the motorcade route. I'm going to go ahead and put up a video right now of that so that you can see that. The Grodins and I recently, and our family, went to Dealey Plaza and we walked this exact route. So I'm just going to put that up right here. From that view, you can see the entirety of Dealey Plaza, and that is where several railroad men ended up viewing the motorcade. But it's a beautiful spot. So Arnold was moving along the fence on the side hidden from the road when, quote, this guy just walked towards me and said that I shouldn't be up there. He showed me a badge and said he was with the Secret Service and that he didn't want anybody up there. That sounded sensible enough, and Arnold retreated to the next best spot, beside a tree on the roadside of the fence, high on the grassy slope beyond the colonnade. So there is a grassy slope, and he would have been on the outside of the fence there. 12:30 p.m., the motorcade turns right, 90 degrees onto Houston Street. Amateur photographer Hughes films the limousine as it heads directly for the depository at the corner of Elm. Simultaneously, he catches the 6th floor of the building in the background. 2 figures are seen in the far right windows. Although there is some debate over the film, when considered in light of compelling eyewitness testimony from several sources, its accuracy becomes apparent. Miltier stands near the intersection at Elm, watching the president as he passes. The car turns left in front of the depository, enters Dealey Plaza, and slowly heads toward the triple underpass leading onto Stemmons Freeway. Over the next few seconds, President Kennedy is assassinated. The leading treatise on this moment is 6 Seconds in Dallas by Josiah Thompson. Used recently by Nova in conjunction with the actual film of the assassination, the Zapruder film, to analyze the event, it remains, after 23 years, the definitive narrative. Yes, that gives me leave to go ahead and look at the copyright page. It's copyright 1991. So this was written 23 years after the event. So it was, in 1991, still seen as the leading treatise about the assassination, 6 Seconds in Dallas. Of course, I would love to have a copy of that book, but they are hard to come by. So maybe one day I'll own it. But I did recently purchase for myself as a treat off of eBay this Saturday Evening Post from December 1967, which has a selection from 6 Seconds in Dallas. So perhaps we'll read that sometime here on the channel. I just found it interesting from the very first time I saw this cover that in 1967 there was already such a credible organization willing to run this headline that 3 assassins killed Kennedy. 6 Seconds in Dallas, major new study shows 3 assassins killed Kennedy. So anyway, this has a selection of 6 Seconds in Dallas in it, but I haven't read the book yet, and I've just read a little bit of that article. Maybe we can read it together sometime. Thompson's description of the sequence of shots is as follows. Okay, so we're going to get his description. The first shot strikes the president in the upper right back, penetrating a depth of 1 or 2 inches. Governor Connolly, we had gone, I guess, 150 feet, maybe 200 feet. I don't recall how far it was, heading down to get on the freeway, when I heard what I thought was a shot. Roy H. Kellerman, Secret Service agent in the limousine said this: "As we turned off Houston onto Elm and made the short little dip to the left going down grade, and there's a report like a firecracker, pop. Jerry D. Kivett, traveling with the motorcade, fourth car back. As the motorcade was approximately 1/3 of the way to the underpass, traveling between 10 and 15 miles per hour, I heard a noise. Lee Bowers, sitting in an observation tower in the train yard to the right of the motorcade. At the moment of the first shot, as close as my recollection serves, the car was out of sight, but behind this decorative masonry wall in the area." So he's talking about the pergola. "Mrs. Billy P. Clay, standing on the sidewalk immediately to the right of the motorcade as it began passing the grassy knoll. She says, just a few seconds after the car passed the location where I was standing, I heard a shot." So it tells us she was standing on the sidewalk immediately to the right of the motorcade as it began passing the grassy knoll. John Arthur Chisholm, standing at the bottom of the grassy knoll to the right of the motorcade. Quote, "And just as he got just about in front of me, he turned and waved at the crowd on this side of the street, the right side. At this point, I heard what sounded like one shot." Jean Newman, who was standing next to Mrs. Clay, said, "The motorcade had just passed me when I heard something that I thought was a firecracker at first, and the president had just passed me because after he had just passed there was a loud report. It just scared me." Karen Westbrook, standing next to Mr. Chisholm. "The car he was in was almost directly in front of where I was standing when I heard the first explosion." Gloria Calvary. These are all names I have never heard. I wonder if you're feeling the same thing. These are eyewitnesses who were right there at the time of the first shot. And I haven't heard most of these names. This is very fascinating for me. I hope it is for you as well. So Gloria Calvary, standing next to Mrs. Westbrook. That's the Karen Westbrook who we just heard from. It says, "The car he was in was almost directly in front of where I was standing when I heard the first shot." We're just getting this absolute flood of people who are telling us when they heard the first shot. Joe Henry Rich, with the fourth card in the motorcade. He said, "We turned off of Houston Street onto Elm, and that was when I heard the first shot." So that's where he was when it happened. Mrs. Earl Cabell, she was in the fifth car back in the motorcade. "We were making the turn, just on the turn, which put us at the top of the hill you see. I heard the shot, and without having to turn my head, I jerked my head up." Mayor Earl Cabell, fifth car back in the motorcade, so with his wife, said, "We were just rounding the corner, making the left turn when the first shot rang out." Yet perhaps the most graphic description of the impact of the first shot was given by William Newman. "We were looking back up the street to see if the motorcade was coming, and the first two shots were fired. And of course, the first shot, boom, the president threw his arms up like that. And then it looked like he was looking in the crowd, like he was looking for something. Just kind of a wild expression." Kenneth O'Donnell saw the president waving just before he was hit. "We see the president waving until he disappears behind the sign. O'Donnell and Powers saw the force of the shot move the president left from his sitting position on the extreme right-hand side of the seat. Mrs. Connolly and Jean Newman saw the president's hands and elbows raised after the first shot." Remember this movement. People think he was grabbing his throat, but actually if you look, it's an upward motion of the arms. A close study of the Zapruder film reveals that the president's fists are clenched and that the movement carries his hands up above his neck. The president seems to be guarding his face with his clenched fists, his elbows elevated at either side. With respect to the bullet hole located in the back, pathologist at National Naval Medical Center was of the opinion this bullet worked its way out of the victim's back during cardiac massage performed at Dallas. During the autopsy, news reached Bethesda that a 6.5 millimeter bullet had been found on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital. So about the first shot, we're being told all of the eyewitness accounts, what the president did immediately following, and what the likely path of the bullet was. That it landed here in his back. It only went in 1 to 2 inches, and then during cardiac massage, it worked its way out and ended up on the stretcher and then rolled off. If that's the case, then that completely deteriorates the whole magic bullet theory, because the one that was found on the stretcher was presumed to be the one that had gone, through the 87 different turns and had a change of heart and went back towards Governor Connolly's leg. That's that bullet that we're told, is the pristine magic bullet. But this telling is saying the bullet that went in and penetrated but did not go through is likely the one that worked its way out and landed on the stretcher, which makes sense to me. What about you? Let me know in the comments what you think about that. The second shot now strikes Governor Connolly in the back, just to the left of his right armpit, right back here, traverses his rib cage, destroying a significant portion of one rib, exit his right front chest, right below his nipple is the description that's given, pierces and shatters his right wrist, a fragment of the bullet then embedding itself in his left thigh. This bullet enters the limousine at a much sharper, imagine it. So you're sitting there in your chair. Imagine what would the trajectory have to be to hit you back here, come out below your nipple, hit your wrist, and go down into your left thigh. Draw the line right now. For me, that is a very sharp angle from how I'm seated. Let me know what yours is. The bullet enters the limousine at a much sharper downward trajectory, 27 degrees, than the bullets which strike Kennedy, and is in all likelihood fired from the top of the Records building, located behind and slightly to the left of the motorcade. I mean, I don't know how you get there. That behind and to the left is the bullet that goes here and down. Some people now that I know of believe that perhaps it came from the roof of the Texas School Book Depository or the far southwest window. So the normally called the Oswald window or the assassin's window would be way on the southeast side of the building, but this window would be all on the southwest. A reminder would be, if there are two shooters from two separate windows, I mean, not only does that do away with the lone gunman thing, but also those two shooters would be able to see each other, because that whole floor was an empty room full of boxes. And you wouldn't be able to conceal your presence from someone on that same floor with you. So if there is a different window being used, it was with two people in concert with one another. Holland, who was an observer that worked for the railroad company, I believe. There's interviews of him. So if you want to see him, he's a very credible witness. You can listen to him. He's very plain spoken and very certain of what he saw. He says, so it tells us he was standing on the triple underpass directly in front of the approaching motorcade, quote, and the governor turned to his right, and then he turned like that. And that's when the governor was shot. He definitely was not hit by the first shot. Thompson said, so you believe the governor was hit by the second shot? Holland said, I know the governor was hit by the second shot. What Holland saw was echoed in the statements of many other witnesses in Dealey Plaza. Not one of these several hundred witnesses saw the assassination as the Warren Commission believed it happened, nor did any of these witnesses believe the second shot missed. Mrs. Hill, standing on the opposite side of the street, immediately to the left of the limousine. This would be Jean Hill, that we've read her book It's here somewhere, I think. We've read her book. We've listened to her account. Let's see what they tell us here. It wasn't with the first shot. To me, he wasn't hit when the first shot hit. Mrs. John Connolly. As the first shot was hit, and I turned to look at the same time, I recall John saying, "Oh, no, no, no." Then there was a second shot, and it hit John. And as he recoiled to the right, just crumpled like a wounded animal to the right, he said, "My God, they are going to kill us all." Governor Connolly's account is this. We had just made the turn, when I heard what I thought was a shot. I heard this noise, which I immediately took to be a rifle shot. I instinctively turned to my right because the sound appeared to come from over my right shoulder, and I saw nothing unusual except just people in the crowd. But I did not catch the president in the corner of my eye. I was turning to look back over my left shoulder into the back seat, but I never got that far in my turn. I got about in the position I'm in now, facing you, looking a bit to the left of center, and then I felt like someone hit me in the back. Any rifle has a velocity that exceeds the speed of sound, and when I heard the sound of that first shot, that bullet had already reached where I was. And after I heard that shot, I had the time to turn to my right and start to turn to my left before I felt anything. So he's saying that the bullet had already hit when he heard the first shot, because he's turning to respond and coming back when the second shot hit him, and he said he felt like someone hit him in the back. Okay, now we're to the head shots. The president is struck in the back of the head by a bullet fired from the 6th floor of the depository, driving his head forward at a speed of 69.6 feet per second. 1/18th of a second later, a shot fired from behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll to the right front of the limousine strikes the president in the area of his right temple and explodes out the back of his skull. This snaps his head backward and to the left at the rate of 100.3 feet per second. So we have this assertion, which is not a new assertion. If it's new to you, I just want you to know, obviously this book was published in 1991, but it comes from Josiah Thompson's early work, where he said, I thought the head went forward slightly and then behind. This explanation is grounded in the visible evidence on the Zapruder film. There are 2 frames, I think, or 3 frames where you can see, and that's where they get this 1/18th of a second later, because there were 18 frames per second. So you get between 2 different frames, you get a violent head forward that you can't really see with the naked eye. As you're watching the film, you hardly notice it. But his head goes forward, and you can tell by looking at Mrs. Kennedy's black collar. That becomes the measuring place where you look at her collar and you can see his head move toward it, so you see less of her collar in the frame. Then after that is the violent head explosion that causes his head to go backwards. So that's where we get 2 shots happening almost simultaneously, but not quite. The first one hit slightly before, which is why his head goes slightly forward before it goes back. Holland. So again, this is the railroad man. He says, the report of the third shot wasn't nearly as loud as the first and second shot or the fourth shot. The bullets travel faster than sound, but the report that I heard of the third one, I heard that before I heard the fourth one, the fourth shot. The third and the fourth bullets hit the president in the head. With the help of Bill Hoffman, a bright young physicist, and the use of a dissecting microscope, I was able to measure with great accuracy the movement of the president's head. After holding steady for some 12 frames, it is suddenly driven forward between frames 312 and 313. Amazingly, in the very next frame, 314, it is already moving backward. A movement it continues in succeeding frames until the president's shoulders strike the rear seat cushion at Z321. What could cause such a reversal? How could this violent double movement be explained? 5 alternatives present themselves. Okay, so now we're going to get 5 different views of what can be happening if you have so picture it, there's 12 frames where the president's head is steady. And then suddenly his head moves forward in one frame, but then by the time you get 2 frames later, his head is traveling backwards at a more precipitous rate. 5 alternatives. Number 1, Thompson eliminated the first 3, i.e. the possibility of the president's head striking some object in the car, Mrs. Kennedy pulling him backward and to the left, or a sudden acceleration of the car. So alternatives 4 and 5 are discussed as follows. Number 4, there was some neuromuscular reaction to the shot from behind that arched the president's body in the opposite direction. Okay, so that would be, he only got shot from the back. He goes forward and then back in a neuromuscular response. So it's sudden, and that's why he does that. The extremely small time factor combined with the relatively large mass of the president's head would tend to rule out such an explanation. The fastest reflex action known to science, the startle response, takes place over an interval of 40 to 200 milliseconds. Beginning with an eye blink in 40 milliseconds, the response wave moves the head forward in 83 milliseconds and then continues downward, reaching the knees in 200 milliseconds. The change in direction we observe occurs in 56 milliseconds, 1/18 of a second, and involves not the negligible mass of an eyelid, but the considerable mass of a human head moving forward under an acceleration of several Gs. Okay, so it's saying if just an eye blink takes 40 milliseconds, and that only requires the muscles and mass involved in this tiny organ of the body, we are only given 56 milliseconds for this entire forward and then back supposed neuromuscular response to take place, and it's involving a much more significant and massive part of the body, of the entire head, to be moved. Were a neuromuscular phenomenon involved, we would expect the muscles of the neck to keep accelerating the head. Its velocity would not show the constancy it does after Z314. But since the motor strip, pre-central gyrus, was blown out by the entering bullet, the likelihood of any muscular reaction at all is considerably diminished. Even if this area did excite some nerve impulse before it was torn from the brain, the resultant movement would be general and random. It would not throw the president's body in any particular direction. As a neurologist explained it to me, the expected neurological effect of such a shot to the head would be for the victim's body to go limp. So that's the explanation for number 4. If it's a neuromuscular or neurological phenomenon going on, it's too small of a point of time for that to be the case. And it would be like a random set of movements rather than a violent force of several Gs going backwards. Okay. The 5th explanation. There is some physical principle or law of nature that explains the double movement. The physics of impacting bodies is quite clear. As Dr. A.J. Riddle, member of the Brain Research Institute and assistant professor of physics at the University of California in L.A., has pointed out, the effects of such impacts are governed by Newton's second law of motion. And we're going to get his lengthy explanation, so let's listen up. Newton's second law of motion, namely that the rate of change of momentum is proportional to the impressed force and is in the direction in which the force acts. So if I, punch a marble, it is directly proportional to how much force I use, and it will go in the direction that the force acts. This has remained inviolate for 3 centuries. Not even the advent of relativity and quantum mechanics has disturbed its validity. No physical phenomenon is known that fails to obey it. One of the most immediate consequences is the conservation of momentum. Basically, the law says that an object hit by a projectile will be given a motion that has the same direction as that of the projectile. Thus, if someone is shot and the shot strikes bone, the general direction of recoil will be away from, not toward, the marksman. So that whatever force hits an object is the direction in which that object will move. Applying Newton's second law to the case in question, and supposing that a bullet fired from the rear struck the president's head, we would expect to see his head and body driven forward. The force of the impact perhaps forcing him out of the rear seat onto the floor. We see the beginning of such a movement at Z 312 to 313. Those are the way we identify the Zapruder film frames if you aren't familiar with that yet. You can look these items up on a Google search. So you're looking for 312 to comparison to 313. That's where you're going to be looking at Mrs. Kennedy's black collar to see the way the president's head moves slightly forward. But then it is suddenly interrupted and replaced by a movement in the opposite direction. If we account for the sudden forward movement as the consequence of a bullet's impact, only a similar hypothesis could account for the equally sudden backward movement. What we see on the Zapruder film are the effects of a double transfer of momentum, one forward, the other backward. At Z313, we witness the effect of a virtually simultaneous double impact on the president's head. One shot was fired from the rear, and the other from the right front. Other witnesses, e.g. Mrs. Hill, Secret Service agents Kellerman and Hill, offered testimony that also tended to support this conclusion. The double impact disperses brain matter in two directions. Thompson's analysis continues. A first umbrella of impact debris dispersed forward over the occupants of the limousine in a pattern that would be the natural outcome of a shot from the rear. But there is another pattern of debris, greater in magnitude, that distributed itself over the left rear of the car and over the two motorcyclists riding behind and to the left. Officer B.J. Martin. Now, if you were with us for the Jean Hill book, you should know this is the person that she titles J.B. Marshall, to use a pseudonym in her book. He was her boyfriend during this time. That's why she stood where she stood. They took a photo of him. She and Mary Mormon were standing there and watching the entire thing, and they were watching BJ and then turned their attention to the president and Mrs. Kennedy. Officer B.J. Martin, riding the outboard cycle some 5 feet to the left and 6 to 8 feet to the rear of the presidential car, told the commission, quote, "There was blood and other material on his uniform and on the windshield and motor of his cycle." Officer Martin's partner riding the inboard cycle was even more spattered. "I was splattered with blood and brain and kind of bloody water. A sizable piece of skull was found 10 to 15 feet to the left of the car's path. Another piece of bone was found approximately 25 feet south of the spot where President Kennedy was shot. South is to his left. It is difficult to understand how a shot from the rear could drive a piece of the occipital rear of the skull bone 25 feet to the left of the vehicle's path." Yeah, if it's from the back and this part gets shattered, it goes where? It goes. Imagine it. The shot from the back, this big piece would go maybe up into the front seat, maybe up and over to the grass down by the bridge, maybe to the road ahead. Maybe it would get driven over. Who knows? But it wouldn't go back into the left into the grass over here. It is not so difficult to understand how a shot from the right front exploding through the rear of the skull could produce precisely that effect. Marilyn Sitzman was only some 75 feet away looking down into the car when the president's head exploded. I believe Sitzman is Zapruder's secretary who was right by him, up by the pergola. She says, "And the next thing I remembered clearly was the shot that hit him on the side of his face, above the ear and to the front, between the eye and the ear." So she's saying right about here, which matches, if you look at some of the autopsy photos, you see a little divot right at the hairline that is likely where the shot went in. So she is describing that exact thing very clearly. The next thing I remembered clearly was the shot that hit him on the side of the face, above the ear and to the front, which then, if you picture that bullet, completely explains that back portion coming out. Other eyewitnesses, the Newman family standing between the limousine and the grassy knoll, observed the same. Quote, I was looking directly at him when he was hit in the side of the head. As the majority of witnesses raced toward and up the grassy knoll, J.C. Price saw a person escaping the area. Quote, I saw one man run toward the passenger cars on the railroad siding after the volley of shots. This man had on a white dress shirt, no tie, and khaki-colored trousers. His hair appeared to be long and dark, and his agility running could be about 25 years of age. He had something in his hand. As stated in Anthony Summers' Conspiracy, we're going to get a long description of this scene. Policemen started pouring into the area. One of the first was Patrolman Joe Smith, who rushed into the parking lot behind the fence because a woman said the shots had come from the bushes. It was there that he smelled gunpowder. The patrolman had drawn his pistol as he ran. He came across a man standing by a car. The man reacted quickly at the sight of Smith and an accompanying deputy. As Smith remembers it, this character produced credentials from his hip pocket, which showed him to be Secret Service. I have seen those credentials before, and they satisfied me and the deputy sheriff. So I immediately accepted that and let him go and continued our search around the cars. There were no authentic Secret Service agents on the grassy knoll. None was on foot either before or immediately after the assassination, and those on motorcycle duty stayed with their cars. As Officer Smith puts it, quote, he looked like an auto mechanic. He had on sports shirt and sports pants, but he had dirty fingernails, it looked like, and hands that looked like an auto mechanic's hands. And afterwards, it didn't ring true for the Secret Service. I should have checked that man closer, but at the time, I didn't snap on it. Gene Hill, who had seen smoke on the knoll just before Officer Smith, quote, ran impetuously across the road, dodging between the cars while the motorcade was still going by. She was ahead of the field in the parking lot, and there she met, quote, a tall and slender man, a man who whipped out Secret Service identification. Gene Hill says that beyond and behind him, she caught sight of a man running. She lost sight of him by the railroad lines some 20 yards away. Officer John Tilson was off duty on the day of the assassination, but happened to be driving with his daughter on the road beyond the railway tracks when he saw a man slipping and sliding down the railway embankment. He came down that grassy slope on the west side of the triple underpass. He had a car parked there, a black car. He threw something in the back seat and went around the front hurriedly and got in the car and took off. Tilson gave chase. After a while, he lost his quarry, but as his daughter confirms, he managed to take the license number of the car. Tilson reported the incident and the number to Dallas Police Homicide that afternoon, but heard no more about the matter. You know, this must be, I wonder if this is, Robert Groden has told me about his memory of hearing the first reports that day and how one of the things that drew him into the case and trying to dig to the bottom of it was the difference between the initial reports and the reports that came following the assassination, and that he remembers hearing the report of police chasing someone across the railroad tracks. So this is interesting. It fits precisely with his remembrance. I mean, he was in New York State just listening to the accounts, but that's what came through that day is they're chasing one of the suspects across the railroad tracks. Here's somebody who sees him running. This is a whole series of put together quotes that make quite a picture, don't they? I wonder what you're thinking at this point. I'd love to hear your response in the comments. We have a little bit left of this telling. I'm really enjoying it. I hope you are too. Thompson pieced together reports of individuals seen fleeing the depository. So here are the people pieced together of people fleeing the book depository building. A second man besides the gunman was seen at a window by Carolyn Walther, who was standing on Houston Street. This second man had on a brown sport or suit jacket. A man answering the same description was seen by James Worrell, leaving a rear door of the depository a few minutes after the assassination. Richard Carr, who was watching from a building under construction on Commerce Street, saw a man in a tan jacket on the top floor of the depository shortly before the assassination. Carr saw the same man a few minutes afterward walk very fast down Houston Street. turn the corner onto Commerce Street, and get into a light-colored Rambler station wagon driven by a Negro on Record Street. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig and motorist Richard Robinson both saw a man run down a grassy incline in front of the depository and get into a light-colored Rambler station wagon. I did not realize anybody but Craig saw this, but there's a man, Richard Carr, who saw it, and motorist Richard Robinson, who saw it. So that's 3 people observing this one moment. Craig said the driver of the station wagon was either a Negro or a dark-complected white man. The station wagon then proceeded through the triple underpass. 12:31 to 12:32, Oswald is confronted in the second-floor lunchroom finishing a Coke by the building's superintendent, Mr. Truly, and Dallas PD officer Marion L. Baker. We're going to listen to their accounts, presumably from the Warren Commission. Truly said, "Immediately after the shooting, I saw a young motorcycle policeman run up to the building, up the steps to the entrance of our building. He ran right by me, and he was pushing people out of the way. I ran up and caught up with him inside the lobby of the building. I ran in front of him. I went up on a run up the stairway. This officer was right behind me and coming up the stairway. By the time I reached the second floor, the officer was a little further behind me than he was on the first floor, a few feet. I ran right on, around to my left, started to continue on up the stairway to the third floor and on up. I suppose I was 2 or 3 steps before I realized the officer wasn't following me. I came back to the second floor landing. I heard a voice coming from the area of the lunchroom. I ran over and looked in the door. I saw the officer almost directly in the doorway of the lunchroom facing Lee Harvey Oswald. He was just inside the door, 2 or 3 feet possibly. The officer had his gun pointing at Oswald." And now we get Baker's telling. "As I came out to the second floor there, I caught a glimpse of this man walking away from this. I happened to see him through the window in this door. He was walking away from me about 20 feet away in the lunchroom." So he's already in the lunchroom and he's walking away, drinking a Coke. "I hollered at him at that time and said, 'Come here.' He turned and walked straight back to me." "Were you suspicious of this man?" "No, sir, I wasn't." "Was he out of breath? Did he appear to be running or what?" "It didn't appear that to me. He appeared normal, you know." "Was he calm and collected?" "Yes, sir. He never did say a word or nothing. In fact, he didn't change his expression one bit." The officer, this is now Truly, "The officer turned this way and said, 'This man work here?' And I said, 'Yes.' Oswald didn't seem to be excited or overly afraid or anything. He might have been a bit startled, like I might have been if somebody confronted me, but I cannot recall any change in expression of any kind on his face. Then we left. Oswald immediately and continued to run up the stairways." Okay. Oswald was next seen by Mrs. Robert Reed, a clerical supervisor whose office was on the second floor. She had been watching the motorcade from the street when she heard the shots. She said, "I ran into the building. I ran up to our office, up the front stairs. I went into the office. I kept walking and I looked up and Oswald was coming in the back door of the office. I met him by the time I passed my desk several feet. I had no thoughts of anything of him having any connection with it at all because he was very calm. He had gotten a Coke and was holding it in his hands, and I guess the reason it impressed me seeing him in there was I thought it was a little strange that one of the warehouse boys would be up in the office at that time. Not that he had done anything wrong. He was just calm. He was moving at a very slow pace. I never did see him moving fast at any time." Oswald is initially under the impression that a protest has just taken place, nothing more. However, when he goes downstairs, he quickly perceives the reality of the situation. Panic begins to set in. Outside the depository, he encountered a crew-cut young man whom he believed to be a Secret Service agent because he had flashed an identity card. Oswald had directed the agent to a telephone and then traveled home to his lodgings by bus and taxi. The, quote, Secret Service agent was probably Robert McNeil, later of the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour, a reporter for the National Broadcasting Company who had abandoned the motorcade after hearing the shots. Oswald's story of how he got home is corroborated by the bus ticket found in his pocket when he was arrested and by a Dallas taxi driver. A few moments later, Lansky functionary Eugene Hale Brading was noticed by the elevator man in the Dow Tex building, an edifice in Dealey Plaza. The Dow Tex building is directly across the street from the records building. The observant elevator man noticed braiding. So this is a man, Eugene Hale Braiding, sometimes known as James Braden or Jim Braden. The observant elevator man noticed Braiding as a stranger and ran to fetch a policeman. Out on the sidewalk, Braiding was detained for acting suspiciously and escorted to the sheriff's office for questioning. At the moment of the assassination, Braiding says he was with his probation officer in an office 2 blocks away. The U.S. parole officer, Roger Carroll, denied that this meeting ever took place. When questioned at the police station, his alias, Jim Braden, fools the authorities and he is released. Ruby sits in a nearby newspaper office with a view of Dealey Plaza. As people gathered around a television in reaction to news of the shooting, Ruby appeared, quote, obviously shaken and an ashen color, just very pale, and sat for a while with a dazed expression in his eyes. That gets us to the end of this reading, and wow, I am so glad. I just went through my collection and tried to, without reading them, choose good portions for each of the selections for this whole series. And I did that probably a month ago, and I'm so grateful that I picked this book, and I hope you are too. I found it fascinating. I loved the look from so many different angles, from eyewitnesses, from Connell, from what was happening in Washington, what's going on with Jack Ruby, where is Oswald? Reportedly, the only people who observed him saw him up at the top. He came down on the elevator to the first floor, went up to the second floor, and then immediately following the assassination is still there on the second floor having his Coke. Very insightful. I hope you loved this reading. Let me know what stood out to you in the comments. Let me know what you enjoyed. Did you think anything was missing? Do you quibble about anything that was presented? Let's hear it in the comments. Next time we are getting into an absolute classic that Rick shared with me that I would never have been able to get on my own. It is David Lifton's book, Best Evidence: Disguise and Deception in the Assassination of John F. Kennedy. A lot of people point to this as their kind of wake-up moment of when they started to realize there truly was a conspiracy. So this book is a top recommendation all the time. We are going to read a selection specifically about the head movement. And so come back for that. We're going to kind of zoom in before we start to go then through the other parts of the story. We're going to get to Parkland. We're going to get to Tippit. We're going to get to the investigation happening there in Dealey Plaza in real time. So come back for the next few sessions as we move through the first hours of the JFK assassination. And we're going to look next at David Lifton's book. I hope you'll come back for that. We'll hope to see you then. Have a great day.